While chugging right along setting up the tank, I know I needed a temporary 3/4 inch union for the main pump. In the extremely very rare case if I lost power with the current temporary setup, it would create a back siphon and drain the tank into the sump. The needed 3/4 inch union was on the list of things to get, but in the midst of moving and everything that comes along with that, I put it on the list of things to eventually do when I had time. Well, you know Reef Aquariums, that rare case happened.
So yeah, I had a tank leak, and this is how it went. You know what? Let's go for a kayak.
So what had happened was, for a temporary solution for the pump, I had a tube coming from the pump in the sump inside of the aquarium, but the tube was underneath about 4 inches of water. It was almost about halfway inside of the water column. And that was just a temporary solution until I can actually get, it was a 1/4 inch union that I was missing. And I went to Home Depot 2 times to check on it to see if I can actually purchase it there, and both times they were out of stock. So that afternoon I went back to Home Depot and they still didn't have it in stock. I asked the guy when it would be in stock, and he said they were so short on plumbing supplies he had no idea when this thing would actually show up again. So what I did is I called another Home Depot and they said that they had them in stock and they would keep one for me. And at that point I pretty much just got in my vehicle and I was on the phone with my friend, and my friend said that he had one in stock. So I went over his house, and while I was at his house, I just noticed that the skies were really dark, and then all of a sudden, bang, it was lightning, thunder, and it just started storming like crazy. So I got my piece from him, got in my vehicle, and just sped over to my house. And let's cue the reenactment of what actually happened.
Honey, I'm home. I've got the union. Where's my dinner? Honey? Why is the floor wet and the lights off? Oh no!
So pretty much immediately after I noticed that we didn't have power, I took another step and I heard the squish, and I immediately knew that something was wrong. And the first thing that popped in my head was the 1/4 inch union that I was actually grabbing was needed, because what had happened is a siphon was started. I tried to guesstimate this, but I think I lost either 15 or 19 gallons of water all over the floor. Now, in all of my years reefing, this has never happened before. It's crazy when I think back on it, is I was getting the 1/4 inch union just in case I lost power. And as it turns out, I lost power maybe 10 minutes before I got home. It's such a crazy story, and it actually happened to me, finally. So what I did is I went straight to work. First thing I did was I grabbed all of the towels that I can find. I grabbed all of my dirty clothes and just started mopping up the carpet, because it's a brand new carpet, it's a brand new place. And after that, I just got out my heater and my fans. I just put them to work, trying to absorb and get rid of as much water off the floor as possible. The next thing I did is I emptied all of the water out of the sump and took the sump and placed it elsewhere. And then I drilled holes on the floor of the cabinet so I can put a fan and a heater inside of those holes to dry off the carpet underneath. And while I had the sump out of the cabinet, I noticed a little sparkle on the bottom of the sump. And it turns out that it's either a very deep scratch on the bottom of the sump, or in fact it's a crack. Either way, I didn't want to take the risk, so what I did is I used that Aquascape Pro caulk and caulked the bottom of the sump, so if there was a crack, it's not going to leak. So the aquarium was sumpless for about a week until I got enough water from the old house so I can do water changes and put that water inside of the sump and restart the aquarium with the sump attached. Hold on, let me see if I can save this cicada. Saved. Makes crazy noises. There it is. And then with the sump attached and the 1/4 inch union in place exactly where it needs to go, I restarted the tank and everything seems operational. And I haven't had any errors yet, cross my fingers, but from now on, with this temporary setup, if I lose power, it's never gonna just overflow all over to the floor. And while I had the sump out of the cabinet, My idea is I'm going to build a riser for the sump, and it's going to raise it about a ½ inch, and then I'm going to cut 2 holes in that piece of MDF, and then obviously spray paint it so if it does get wet it doesn't absorb and start breaking apart. Now what those holes are going to do is if the sump starts leaking, I'm going to place the equivalent of what a Neptune Apex leak sensor is. So basically the only thing that sensor is 2 wires, and if those wires touch, it sends a signal to your Apex to let you know that that switch is either open or closed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some Cat 5 or Cat 6 from my breakout box, and then I'm going to run that wire through the sump on the bottom, and I'm going to have those 2 wires very close to each other but not touching and exposed. So if the sump does leak for some reason, remember where I showed you that supposable crack was on the sump. If that ever does open up, or if the sump does overflow, all of that water is either going to go over the sump or underneath the sump and come out of those 2 holes and make contact with those 2 sets of 2 wires. And that's going to send a signal to my Apex to text or email me and let me know that there's a leak inside of the cabin. And after a few weeks, everything dried up and everything was back on schedule. So now that everything is dry, what I'm going to do is probably tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to go back to the old house and make one more trip with the fish, the big frog spawn, and the rest of the coral and rock. And then I'm going to put that in my aquarium, and that's about it. Now back to the program.
And here's just a little update on the tank. So for the past month, I've been going over the other house and doing water changes on the 30 gallon. And every time I did a water change, I would bring back the old dirty water with a little bit of coral in it. This row right here was like 1 water change. That was 1 water change. Like that was 1 water change. That was probably another water change. And this was a different water change. So this is what it looks like so far. Yeah, I did go through the algae bloom. As you can see on the bottom of the glass, there's a lot of algae. Over here with the MP40 is on, you can see there's not a lot of algae, but yeah, so I had the algae bloom. The algae bloom has gone away. There's still a little bit on the bottom of the aquarium. Nothing too bad, but when I do the first water change, I'm gonna scrape all that up anyway, so it'll be a nice white bottom again. And in 2 days, I go back to the house and I'm not gonna perform a water change. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna get the remainder of the coral and bring it over with the fish. So that'll be a lot of fun. The fish have gone through three or 4 moves, so I'm sure they're probably used to it, but it's been a while. It's been 4 or 5 years since my last move, so that'll be a lot of fun. So I am back at the old house, and I am removing 15 gallons of water, and removing the remainder of the coral and fish.
Those guys are actually attached to the bottom of the aquarium. That's going to be impossible to get out. So I'm going to work on these right now. Should just chip off. There's one. There's 2. All right, so I just got back home. There are 1, 2, 3 buckets full of coral and fish. What I'm going to do next is a 15-gallon water removal from the aquarium, and then empty these 3 5-gallon buckets into the aquarium, sort of like a little mini water change, but I'm actually using the water from the old fish tank, which is a really good thing.
Stars shining bright.
Before I introduce any of the rock and coral, I remove any algae or anything I do not want to make it into the new setup. Once approved, I start transferring everything over to the new aquarium.
Dream a little dream of me. Sweet dreams, it sunbeams find you.
the coral first, introducing the frog spawn, so when the clowns are introduced, they have a safe and familiar hiding spot.
And next comes the frog spawn and the fish. So I'm gonna get the frog spawn out first. And it looks like the 6 line has attached itself. To the frog spawn. So there is a 6th line in there somewhere. Hopefully not underneath of it. Poor guy's really scared. And next comes the 2 clowns. There's Mama. And here comes the little one. Alright. All fish in. So that went swimmingly, pun intended. Clownfish seem to be doing their thing. We really haven't found the frog spawn yet. When I put the frog spawn in, I noticed that the 6th line was actually wrapped around one of the bases of the frog spawn heads. I know that I put the frog spawn in with the 6th line wrapped around it, but as of right now, I can't tell where that 6th line went. That's what it currently looks like right now. Looks like a coral graveyard, except everything's alive and everything's doing pretty well. So I think the next step is just to let these fish get used to their new surroundings, and eventually I'm gonna start moving some coral around and some rock around and start aquascaping this thing the way it deserves to be aquascaped. And I'm gonna go back to the old house and I'm gonna grab the MP10s and the skimmer and the pump and all that jazz, and then come back and install everything in here. Found the 6th line. He's underneath that rock, just kind of hanging out, scared as all hell, so I'm gonna leave him alone for a while.
In the next episode, I will break down the old tank and start installing all of the gear onto the new setup. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and ring that bell for notifications of new videos. It's completely free and a great way to support the channel.
Why is the floor wet and the lights off? Oh no!